The opening line of the famous novel A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens goes like this: Marley was dead. There was no doubt about it. In fact, for about a paragraph, Charles Dickens goes on to insist that Jacob Marley's actually really dead as you can get, and that you have to know that for the whole rest of the story to make sense. Because, as you might well know, the story A Christmas Carol turns on the idea that Ebenezer Scrooge, Jacob Marley's former partner before his untimely death, is going to be visited by ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, and the ghost of Christmas future, and the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Jacob Marley. And we have to know at the beginning that Jacob Marley was really dead in order to understand why it's such a big deal that his ghost comes and visits Ebenezer Scrooge, so that we know that when he has this vision of a visitation from his former deceased business partner, it's not a hallucination, it's the real thing, at least in the story, right? You have to know that in order for the rest of the story to make sense, to hit the way it's supposed to. Think about that. Every year that we hear the story in Matthew's gospel, that we're going to hear this coming Sunday, of John the Baptizer in prison. Because John comes with this question. He sends messengers to Jesus because John is in prison. And he says, are you the one we're supposed to wait for? Or are we supposed to wait for someone else? And the reason I think of that interesting beginning of A Christmas Carol is in order to understand John's question, you have to remember, this is the thing you've got to be clear about. John really does believe in Jesus. John is the one who staked his whole career earlier on saying, the one who's coming after me is more powerful than I. When Jesus is baptized, John recognizes him and goes, you're the one we've been waiting for. You're the one the Holy Spirit has anointed. You're the one. I'm not even worthy to untie your sandals, and here I am baptizing you. That doesn't make sense, right? John has not only announced that the Messiah is coming, but he's already publicly gone on record saying, this Jesus, this is the guy. And now he's got questions, right? Now he's wondering. This is different from, say, when the respectable religious people, the Pharisees or the Sadducees or even Pontius Pilate or King Herod have doubts about Jesus. There's plenty of times when those figures express doubt about Jesus, or I hear they're calling you the Messiah, who are you really? But John really does believe in Jesus. John has gone on record saying he's convinced Jesus is the Messiah, the one they're waiting for. And for him to be asking, are you really the one who is to come, or are we supposed to wait for someone else? Well, that changes everything, right? It's like discovering at the beginning of A Christmas Carol, okay, I'm supposed to understand Marley is dead. That makes a whole big difference when he finally shows up later on as a ghost, right? John really does believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but the problem is Jesus, the more and more his ministry continues, doesn't look like what John was expecting. There's the challenge, right? John had not only spent all of his chips announcing that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah, he's not only spent a lot of time telling everybody, get ready, Messiah is coming. John also seemed to assume that when the Messiah came, he'd be known for his violent, powerful dominion, right? We heard last Sunday, John described this coming figure as someone who's got an axe, who's going to chop down every bad tree, that he's like someone who's going to kindle a fire and burn the chaff with unquenchable flame. And Jesus doesn't look like that. Jesus doesn't look like a conquering king. Jesus hasn't raised up an army to overthrow the Romans. Jesus hasn't knocked down the temple to show those Sadducees who's boss. Jesus hasn't done anything powerful, anything to zap people, anything to show judgment and condemnation of sinners or the unrighteous. And John had sort of assumed that's what the Messiah was going to do. You know, it would be obvious when the Messiah came because he'd be zapping all the unrighteous people. And when the question comes to Jesus, he sends a reply back to these messengers. You go tell John what you've seen and heard. You know, you've seen the sick who are healed, and those with skin diseases like leprosy cleansed, and those who couldn't walk are able to walk again, and those who couldn't see receive their sight, and the dead are raised, and the poor have good news given to them. In other words, Jesus doesn't say, I'm not the Messiah. He doesn't say, you got the wrong guy, you were wrong. No, you're correct, the assumption you made, John, about what the Messiah's work would look like, maybe that needs some revision. That what John needs isn't to find a new Messiah, but maybe a new definition of what the Messiah was supposed to be. Jesus presents this picture that his reign looks like healing, bringing life, raising the dead, and lifting up those who've been stepped on. That's what his mission turns out to be. So often in our lives, we have this way of wanting to force God to fit into our cookie cutter expectations. We do it at Christmas too, right? It's so tempting to make Jesus just stay this convenient baby figure that we can project all of our wishes onto, or sort of recast God to be like Santa Claus or something like that. Jesus insists on being who he has been sent to be. Jesus insists on bringing God's kingdom, God's reign in terms of bringing life and healing, even if we had pictures of something different, something dominating and powerful and overpowering everybody else. Jesus hasn't come to fulfill our agendas, but to come and fulfill his own. It's a reminder to me that if even John the Baptizer can get it wrong, right? If even John the Baptizer can partially get it right that Jesus is the right person, but get it wrong that he doesn't quite understand what Jesus' mission really is, then maybe we should be honest too. There may be times where it's not that our faith in Jesus is wrong, but to keep asking, am I projecting stuff onto Jesus, what I want Jesus to be, what I think Jesus is supposed to be? Can we instead let Jesus tell us what he's come for, show us how he's come to bring life? That kind of surprising realization is where we're going to be looking this coming Sunday for the third Sunday of Advent at our 8 o'clock service. And we invite you to be a part of it. See where Jesus just might keep surprising us. See you then.